I hadn't planned on working the night shift at the 7-Eleven, but when Dave called in sick, I needed the extra hours. It was a quiet Tuesday night, the kind where nothing ever happens. I didn't expect anything unusual. The store was slow, and I found myself staring at the clock, counting down the hours until I could go home. Around midnight, a man came in. I didn't think much of it at first. He was just another customer, shuffling around the store in a worn-out jacket and dirty jeans. He had a scruffy beard and a hat pulled low over his eyes. I was in the middle of restocking chips when he walked up to the counter with a pack of cigarettes and a lighter. I rang him up and he paid in cash. "Nice night, huh?" I tried to make small talk, something to break the silence. He didn't respond, just nodded and stared at the counter. I figured he was having a rough night, too. I handed him his change and watched as he left the store, the bell over the door jingling softly as he stepped out. The store was quiet again, just the hum of the refrigerators and the occasional car driving by outside. I settled back behind the counter and tried to focus on the magazine I was reading. After about 20 minutes, I heard the door jingle again. It was the same man, but he looked different. His jacket was now zipped up, and he seemed agitated. "Hey, forgot something?" I asked, trying to be friendly. He didn't look at me. He went straight to the bathroom in the back of the store. I figured he was just having a rough night, maybe needed a break. I went back to my magazine, trying to ignore the rising sense of unease. About 10 minutes later, I heard the bathroom door creak open. I glanced up, expecting to see the man coming out, but the store was still quiet. I waited a few more minutes, then decided to check. I walked back to the bathroom and knocked on the door. "Everything okay in there?" I called out. There was no answer. I tried the door, but it was locked. I was starting to get a bit worried. I didn't want to be rude, but if something was wrong, I needed to know. I called out again, louder this time. "Hey, are you all right?" Still nothing. I took a deep breath and decided to call the police. Before I could dial, I heard a shuffling noise from the other side of the door. I froze. It sounded like someone was moving around in there, but there was no response to my calls. Finally, I heard the lock click, and the door slowly creaked open. The man was standing there, his face pale and eyes wide. He looked like he hadn't slept in days. He didn't say a word, just pushed past me and walked quickly out of the store. I watched him go, feeling a cold sweat break out on my forehead. I didn't know what to do. Part of me wanted to follow him, but I was scared. I called the police anyway, just to be safe, and told them everything that had happened. They said they'd send someone over to check it out. After they arrived, I felt a bit better. They checked the bathroom but found nothing unusual. They said the man might have been in some sort of trouble, but there was nothing to worry about now. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The rest of the shift was uneventful. I kept glancing at the clock, waiting for the minutes to tick by. When my replacement finally showed up, I was relieved beyond words. I told them about the strange encounter, and they said they'd keep an eye out for anything unusual. When I finally got home, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about the man and what might have happened if I hadn't checked on him. It was just a routine night shift, but it turned into something I couldn't quite explain. I guess sometimes, even the quietest nights can be the most unsettling.
I had been working the night shift at the local convenience store for a little over a month. It wasn't glamorous work, but it paid the bills, and I didn't mind the quiet nights. The store was on a back road, far from the busy part of town. Most of the time, it was just me and the empty aisles. One night, just before midnight, a man came in. I remember him clearly because he was out of place. He was wearing a dark blue jacket and a baseball cap pulled low over his eyes. The kind of hat that makes you look suspicious without trying. I had just finished stocking the shelves, so I was standing behind the counter when he walked in. He didn't look at me, just went straight to the back of the store. I shrugged it off. People come in all the time, and most of them don't seem like they belong. What caught my attention was how long he stayed back there. It's a small store. You can find everything you need in a few minutes, but he stayed out of sight for nearly 20 minutes. I tried to shake off my unease. It was late, and my shift was dragging. I decided to check on him. I walked down the aisles, glancing into each one. He was gone. The store was empty except for me. I went back to the counter, trying to stay focused. My eyes kept darting to the store's entrance, and every time the bell above the door jingled, my heart jumped. It was just the wind or a stray cat. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. An hour passed. I was getting tired and bored when the bell rang again. I looked up to see the same man standing in the doorway. He was staring at me now, his eyes visible under the brim of his cap. He walked in slowly, not saying a word. This time, he headed for the cooler. I watched him closely. It was odd. He was acting like he was searching for something specific, but he didn't seem to be grabbing anything, just pacing back and forth, occasionally looking out the front door like he was expecting someone. My shift was almost over, and I was ready to go home. I kept an eye on the man, feeling increasingly uneasy. Finally, he picked out a soda, paid for it in cash, and left without a word. The store was quiet again. I made sure everything was in place, then began my end-of-shift routine. As I was finishing up, I noticed something odd. In the cooler where the man had been, there was a little piece of paper lying on the floor. It was folded up, and my curiosity got the better of me. I picked it up and unfolded it. It was a note. "Stay away from the woods at night. They're looking for you." I laughed nervously, thinking it was just some kind of prank or a joke, but something about it felt too deliberate. I decided to keep the note to myself. As I walked to my car, the night felt colder, and the shadows seemed longer. I drove home, my thoughts racing. I didn't see anything unusual on the way, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. That night, I didn't sleep well. Every creak and groan of the house made me jump. I kept thinking about the note. Who would leave something like that, and why? The next night, I went back to the store. The man didn't show up again, but I couldn't stop thinking about him or the note. I tried to act normal, but every noise made me jump. Every customer seemed to have a hidden agenda. After a few days of restless nights and paranoid shifts, I started noticing little things. Strange cars parked near the store, people hanging around outside. It was like the whole world was on edge, watching me. The note and the man were starting to feel like a warning I should have taken more seriously. I kept working, hoping it would blow over, but I was always on edge. The man never came back, and eventually, the strange activity around the store faded. But I couldn't forget. I still wonder if that note was a real warning or just the work of a prankster. The woods behind the store still look eerie, especially at night. Sometimes, when I drive home after a shift, I glance at the trees and wonder what might be lurking out there.
I started working the night shift at the old hospital about 6 months ago. It wasn't my first choice, but the pay was better, and the hours fit my schedule. Plus, the idea of fewer people around seemed like a perk. Less chaos, fewer questions. I was wrong. The hospital is huge, built in the early 1900s. The walls are thick, and the floors are that old, cold tile that echoes every footstep. During the day, it's bright and busy, but at night, it's different. It feels like the building changes, like it has its own personality after dark. I was on my usual round, checking in on patients, making sure everything was quiet. Most of the lights were dimmed, and the only sounds were the soft beeps of machines and the occasional cough from a patient. It was calm, almost peaceful, but there's always that underlying tension, that unease that settles in your gut when you're alone in a place that shouldn't be empty. The first time I noticed something odd was a few weeks in. I was walking past an old storage room near the back of the hospital. The door was slightly ajar, and I caught a glimpse of something moving inside. It was just a shadow, but it was enough to make me stop. I listened, straining to hear over the hum of the building. Nothing, just silence. I shook it off, convincing myself it was a trick of the light or maybe a rat scurrying around. I didn't want to think too hard about it, but then it happened again and again. One night, I was near the end of my shift, around 4 a.m. That's when the tiredness really kicks in, and your mind starts playing tricks on you. I was heading back to the nurse's station when I heard it. Soft footsteps, just behind me. I stopped, turning around quickly, expecting to see one of the other nurses or maybe a patient out of bed. But there was no one. The hallway was empty. I felt the hair on the back of my neck stand up. I wasn't alone. I could feel it, but I couldn't see anything, couldn't hear anything more. I tried to laugh it off, told myself I was just tired, but I couldn't shake the feeling. A week later, I was doing another round, checking on the patients in the ICU. The unit was quiet, with only a couple of the elderly patients in their beds. I was writing in one of the charts when I heard it again, those soft footsteps. This time, they were slower, like someone was deliberately trying to be quiet. I froze, my pen still in hand, and listened. The footsteps stopped just outside the door. I looked up, expecting to see someone walk in, but the door stayed closed. I waited, heart pounding, for what felt like minutes but was probably only seconds. Finally, I walked over and opened the door. The hallway was empty just like before. That was the moment I started to worry that something was really wrong. I began talking to some of the other night shift nurses, casually at first, trying to see if anyone else had noticed anything strange. They all had stories. Small things like shadows moving in the corner of their eyes, or doors that seemed to close on their own. We started to joke about the night shift curse. But underneath the laughs, we were all a little uneasy. Then, 2 nights ago, things got worse. I was in the break room, trying to get through the last hour of my shift. The room is small, with just a table, a few chairs, and a coffee maker that hasn't been cleaned properly in years. I was sitting there, staring at the clock, willing it to move faster, when the door to the break room slowly creaked open. It was so slow, like someone was pushing it just enough for it to move, but not enough to make it obvious. I stared at the door, waiting for someone to walk in, but no one did. My heart was racing, and I could feel sweat on my palms. I stood up, slowly, and walked over to the door. I grabbed the handle and yanked it open. The hallway outside was dark, but I could see the entire length of it, empty. I don't know what's going on in this hospital, but it's not something I can explain. It's not ghosts, not something supernatural. It's just off, like the building itself is alive, or like someone is messing with us, waiting in the shadows, playing games. I've started looking for other jobs. The money isn't worth it, and even if it's all in my head, even if it's just my imagination, I don't want to be around to find out what happens next.